Hey guys, happy Fun Food Friday and welcome back to the new kitchen. So today is Rigby's birthday and Tommy and I wanted to have a little celebration, just the three of us. For Rigby we made her a pumpkin and blueberry cake, and for us I'm going to make some soft pretzel bites. So I thought I'd teach you guys how to make them. So for this recipe, I'm going to be using my stand mixer with the dough hook attachment. If you don't have a dough hook attachment, that's fine. You can just use the paddle attachment. The dough hook is intended for kneading dough in the bowl, so that you don't have to do it by hand. But the paddle attachment will do just fine as well. It just makes the machine work a little harder. You can also do this by hand, and I'll kind of tell you as we go along how you're going to do it. But obviously you would start by mixing it all together in a separate bowl. So to start, I have 3/4 of a tablespoon of yeast. And then I have 1 cup of milk that I heated in the microwave for about 1.5 minutes. You want it to be pretty warm, but not crazy hot because you don't want to kill the yeast. But basically what we're doing is we're activating the yeast. So I'm going to add this in. That was 1 cup of milk. And now I'm going to let this sit for 1 minute to 5 minutes, depending on when it starts getting bubbles. So I'll come back to you when it gets nice and bubbly. Alright, so you probably can't see it from there, but there are bubbles that are forming on the surface. A lot of them are popping just as quickly as they're forming. But since I see bubbles forming, I know that the yeast is working, so I can start to build my dough. So I'm going to start by adding 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. Now sugar feeds yeast, so the yeast is going to eat this and it's going to start working even more. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of butter. This butter has been sitting out for most of the day, so it's nice and soft. I'm going to add about 1/3 of my flour. It should be about 1 cup. I have a total of 2 1/4 cups, but I'm going to add about 1 cup of it right now. And then I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of salt, sorry. So I'm adding 1 teaspoon of salt, and salt kind of slows down the yeast so that it doesn't go absolutely crazy. So I'm going to sprinkle that in. And I'm going to close the top, and I'm going to give it a mix until it's really well combined. Alright, so I've mixed it thoroughly. The hardest part about mixing it is making sure that the butter is completely mixed in. Since the milk that we added is really warm, the butter melts slowly as it's mixing, and it's also broken up by the dough hook. So what I did was I occasionally would stop it when I thought that the butter was melted. I would scrape down the sides and I would kind of just mix it around and just make sure that the butter was not there anymore. So I had to do that a couple of times, but I finally got the butter to melt. It's all broken down in there. There are no big hunks of butter. So I'm going to add the rest of the flour, and I'm going to keep mixing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it until it's all mixed in there, but then I'm going to continue to mix it from there. Since I'm using a dough hook, that'll be my kneading. So all of this you would have, if you're doing this by hand, you would have mixed it together like normal in a bowl, and then you would pour it out onto the counter and you would knead it just like I've shown you in, I think, like the tortilla video. I showed you how to knead. So you would knead it like that until it's smooth and elasticy. So that just means that you can stretch it and it'll bounce back. But since I'm using the mixer, I've got the dough hook, I can knead it in here. So I'm going to knead it until it is smooth and it is elastic. If I notice that it's really sticking to the sides of the bowl, I'm going to add a little extra flour. You'll want to stop it occasionally to scrape down the sides. You want to make sure that all of that flour actually gets mixed in. Alright, so see how the dough is still really sticky? This is how I know that I need to add more flour. So I'm going to keep mixing this. I'm going to occasionally add some more flour until it stops sticking to the sides. I'll come back and show you what it looks like when I'm done, and I'll let you know about how much flour I had to add to get there. Alright, so my dough has been kneading in the mixer for probably about 5 minutes, and then I took an extra minute or two to knead it by hand just so that I can really get a feel for how smooth, how elastic it actually is. So you can tell it's not sticky anymore, it's nice and smooth, and if I pinch it like this, it bounces back. Well, it starts to. It's never going to completely go back, but it starts to go back into the dough ball. That's how I know that it's nice and elastic. You could also poke it with your finger, and if it fills back in that hole, then you know that it's elastic. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it right back in this bowl, and I'm going to let it rise for about an hour. I want it to double in size. So I'm going to leave this here in the bowl. I'm going to let it rise, and I'll come back to you when it's done. Alright, so it's been about an hour, probably a little bit more, and the dough is doubled in size. But before I do anything with that, I want to get a couple of other things prepared. So the first thing is I have a pot of water over here that I'm going to turn on. Oop, wrong one. I want to do this one. And I'm going to bring that up to a boil. And when it comes up to a boil, I'm going to dump in a bunch of baking soda. But I'm going to save that for when that boils. I'm also going to preheat the oven to 450 degrees. So now that we have that going, I can pull out my dough. You can see it has doubled in size. So I'm going to punch it down to kind of press some of the air out. And I'm going to cut it into fourths. Just using a butter knife. Doesn't have to be perfect, I just need it in smaller pieces for when I start working with it. So there we go. Alright, so I'm going to pull out one of the quarters. I'm going to bring back my cutting board. On here I've just floured the surface, and I'm going to start forming this into a rope and rolling it out. It's going to slide all over the place because the top is slippery. I'm just going to start rolling these out until it's a long rope. Alright, so I'd say that's probably a pretty good size. So I'm going to set this up top, and I'm going to grab the next quarter. And I'm going to do that to each one of these quarters until I have 4 ropes of dough. So when I cut these in the bowl, they weren't exactly the same size, so you'll see that some of them are a little longer than others. But basically what I'm looking for is for them to be about the same width so that I can try and keep the little dough bites about the same size. So next what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start cutting them into little bite-sized pieces, however big you're going to want your little pretzel bites to be. So I'm going to go through all of these, cutting them into bite-sized pieces. Alright, so I have my dough bites right here that are all cut up into bite-sized pieces just how I want them. My water is boiling, so I brought over my cookie sheet. So basically what's going to happen, I'm going to load this water up with baking soda. I'm going to drop a couple of the dough pieces into the baking soda water, and then using my slotted spoon, I'm going to take them out and I'm going to put them on this cookie sheet. Before I can do that, I have to grease my cookie sheet. You want to make sure it's super greased because sometimes the baking soda will make it a little sticky. So I'm going to slowly sprinkle in some baking soda. You want to be careful because, as you can see, the baking soda really makes it flare up. So just kind of wing it. You want it to be pretty heavily saturated with baking soda, but you don't want it to be super packed with baking soda. And now I'm going to start dropping a couple of these in. You only want to leave them in there for a couple of seconds. So I'll drop in 3, and just about as quickly as I drop it in, I'm going to take it out. I'm going to put it right on the cookie sheet. So I'll show you again. I'm going to drop in 3. And then I'm going to take it right out. Put it on the cookie sheet. And they will rise more on the cookie sheet, so you want to make sure that you spread them out. I'm kind of just dumping them on here right now, but when I actually go to put this in the oven, I'm going to kind of move them around and make sure that they're actually positioned where I want them to be. They might stick together, but I'm not hugely worried about it. So I'm going to finish all of the rest of the dough bites, and then I'll come back to you. So all of the little pieces of dough have all gone in the boiling baking soda solution, and now they're on the greased cookie sheet. So I'm going to put these in the oven, and I'm going to let them bake for about 5 to 10 minutes. You want them to be nicely golden brown. So my pretzels baked in the oven for 8 or 9 minutes, and they are perfectly golden brown, so I know that they're done. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some melted butter. I'm going to spoon it over the top of each one. Make sure that they get nice and covered. And then after I cover each one with a little bit of butter, I'm going to take some coarse sea salt, and I'm going to give it a little sprinkle of salt. Now, if you wanted to make cinnamon sugar pretzels, you could spoon the butter over the top, and then you could sprinkle them with cinnamon sugar, or you could spoon the butter over the top and you could shake them in a bag of cinnamon sugar like what we did with the donut holes. That's completely up to you. Now, what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to make up some cheese sauce, and I'm going to serve them with cheese sauce, but you can absolutely eat them just how they are. They are fantastic. So let me know if you make these at home. Let me know how they turn out. Send me some pictures. And I hope you guys have an awesome weekend.